Hello, my name is Ella Marie Reinsteiner Stuckey. Thank you so much for coming to visit this afternoon. I imagine that some of you may have traveled by trolley to get to this beautiful green space today. If you haven't been on the trolley recently, what you would notice is that the back of the trolley becomes an enclosed room, and there is a cuspidor in the back of the trolley, sometimes known as a spittoon. So in 1907, Dr. Tuttle, who was the secretary for the State Board of Health, really pushed hard to get spittoons or cuspidors placed in hotel lobbies, in railway cars, in trolleys, in moving picture theater lobbies, because, as he described it, in the back of railway cars, you would have tobacco chewers who would spit on the floor. You would have young boys eating peanuts and dropping those shells on the floor. And you would have consumptives expectorating on the floor. And the floors of railway cars were filthy. And periodically the brakeman would come through and sweep up the floor and stir up all of those germs. In particular, we were worried about the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, because that is a very infectious disease that has a high lethality. So if we could contain the sputum and the sneezing spray of individuals with tuberculosis, we could reduce the spread of that plague across the country. So at that same time, we saw a plethora of signs like these. There was a huge anti-spit campaign across the country. So we would see signs like these on top of railway cars, on trolleys, in the windows of different storefronts, in magazines, in newspapers. People sometimes would hand out cards which had the anti-spit logos on them. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born November 2nd, 1878 in Tell City, Indiana. So that should tell you a little bit about my heritage. Tell City was named for William Tell. Remember, he's the gentleman who had the apple on his head, on his son's head, and he used a crossbow to shoot that apple off of his son's head, thus starting the revolution for freedom in Switzerland. So my parents had 4 daughters. My sister Katie and I were the 2 oldest, went to nursing school in Indiana. And we both worked at the Bainey Tuberculosis Camp in Evanston, Indiana. I left in 1914 to move to Belgrade, Montana, and I was a head nurse there at a private hospital in Belgrade. And then the most wonderful thing happened. I met and fell in love with Guy Stuckey. So Guy was from the Bozeman area, and he was a mortician. And he and I married Christmas Eve, 1915. I was 28 years old, Guy was 22 years old. We were very, very happy together. We moved to Missoula, Montana in July of 1917, just 3 months after America entered the Great War. Guy worked for the Lucy and Sons mortuary, and I was so honored to be asked by the newly founded Montana Association for the Study and Prevention of Tuberculosis to join their board. And they asked if I would take on the role of public health nurse for the association. So my job was to travel across this great state of Montana, assessing the health of school children in particular, in every school, in every county in Montana. Oh my gosh, the miles that I traveled. For example, I would look for children and would be assessing for specific defects in children. So for example, in the Lewis and Clark County rural school system, I spent 3 weeks there. I assessed 800 children, and 400 of them were found to be defective. half of the children. Now that was not common. I had almost half of the children in Missoula County were found to be defective. So by defective, what I meant was that they had difficulties with their vision. They had difficulties with their hearing. They were malnourished. They had tonsils and adenoids that were interfering with their ability to sleep well at night. And it always amazed me that so many of these children who were born and raised on dairy farms were drinking coffee and tea instead of healthy, bone-growing milk. So I really worked hard with children and their families. One of the things that we did was to enroll children in what was called the Modern Health Crusade. This was a fabulous program that was not only here in Montana, but went across the country, where children were encouraged to participate in what we called health chores. For example, I would get 11 hours of sleep at night with my window open. I would be very careful to not put my finger or pencils up my nose. I would drink plenty of water during the day. I would slowly drink 2 glasses of milk every day. I would wash my hands carefully every day. I would brush my teeth carefully at least twice a day. And I would take a bath and change my underwear at least once a week. So students who were very engaged in this program, I'm really proud of the success we had here in Montana. As they moved through the program and they accrued a certain number of hours, they would win different buttons. So this was a crusade, and we used terminology that the Crusaders would have used. So this pin right here would be awarded to students who reached the page level. This one here, the students who reached the squire level. And students who really put in a lot of time and effort and dedication to their health would get this gold color medal here called the Knight Medal. So students were very, very engaged in this program, and it was a huge success in Montana. We firmly believed, the association and myself, that if we could keep children healthy, then they would be better able to combat exposure to the tuberculosis bacteria. So children's health, so very important. I worked for the association from 1917 to 1929. From 1929 to 1936, I was the public health nurse for the school system in Missoula County. So I believe I'm the first public health nurse in the state of Montana. In 1935, Guy was able to purchase his own mortuary in Missoula, and I helped him with his business. But in 1939, tragedy struck when Guy, who was very involved in civic duties, ignored abdominal pain. And he died very suddenly from peritonitis, August 2nd, 1939. He was almost 46 years old, had his own business, and had just been a year before elected as the county coroner for Missoula. He died at 8 o'clock in the morning. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was being installed as the coroner to complete his term. So I was the first woman coroner in the state of Montana. I completed his 3 years, then I ran again for coroner, won that election, and my campaign was continued efficiency in office, because if nothing else, I am an organized and efficient woman. Under my tutelage as the coroner, we had the first women sitting on juries in Montana. So I've always been very pro-woman, worked very hard for women's rights across the state of Montana. I ended up retiring from public health nursing in 1970 after a long career. I had 53 years of working with the Red Cross to sell Christmas seals, some of which are right here. Christmas seals. And in fact, in 1913, when I had my first job working at the Bainey camp and I was selling Christmas seals for the first time, my committee and I sold $1,034 worth of Christmas seals in 1 week. They were a penny a seal. We were so very, very proud of those efforts. Over the course of my career, I have spoken to the press, I've spoken to the state, the officials at the state level about the status of the health of Montanans, in particular children, and some of the issues that we faced with tuberculosis. In 1917, when we had many of our brave boys who were drafted into the military for the Great War, we had over 1,000 of those boys in Montana unable to serve because they showed signs and symptoms of tuberculosis. There was no place in Montana to treat them. Galen, our sanitarium, was full already. That was built in 1913. By 1917, it was bursting at the seams. It was a real problem. The other problem that I saw in 1917 had to do with my volunteer work with the Red Cross, where there was a dire need for bandages and dressings to be sent overseas. And it seemed to me that only women would show up at the volunteer office for the Red Cross in the evenings to roll bandages, while there were many able-bodied men, either too young to serve or too old to serve, who could have come and helped us out. So that was a newspaper headline of mine in 1917. I just couldn't understand why it was only women that were showing up to volunteer, because women worked hard during the day also. So as I think back over my long career in public health, what I would want people to remember is that long after I'm dead and gone, long after maybe my name is a memory just to a few people, that people will remember that viruses and bacteria are tenacious. And I predict that at some point in the future, the populace will be plagued with another scourge that will absolutely threaten the lives of people. So what I would recommend is that people follow the guidelines in the modern health crusade, and that they pay attention and heed the advice of their public health nurse, because there is nothing more important to your public health nurse than your health, your children's health, and the health of the community. So thank you so much for coming today.